Hello and welcome to the Ascendant Art podcast, where we are on a search for art that is ascending above the mainstream. It is a free play discussion tonight. This is Mike with Catalytic Comics, here with Vinny from Little Chad and Joey from Keeper's Can. How are you guys doing tonight?
Woo! Yeah!
Well, I was waiting for the excitement to wear off from Joey's, but yeah, I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome. So, of course, we're always talking about Ascendant Art. We're talking about building up excitement. Of course, we're building up excitement for what's going to be a pretty dark free play episode, given what we got planned.
Ooh, that was a good segue there.
Wait, so we're not talking about My Little Pony and
My Little Pony: Friendship and Magic is actually a good show. I'll fight you on that one.
It's a dystopia.
That's right, because
it's actually very capitalist. They all have businesses. They all want to make money.
There you go. So for tonight's topic, we're going to be talking about dystopian literature. Just kind of came up with the idea because I've been reading a couple of novels about it lately, doing some research, and it actually is a pretty fascinating topic. So I think kind of first thing we're going to do to open up on the agenda is first just try to figure out what a dystopia is, because I know one of the debates we had getting ready for this was the question of like, is Office Space a dystopia? Or another movie I like, Falling Down. So first, how about you guys tell me what y'all think? How can we start defining what a dystopia is?
Well, according to this here website I'm looking at, there are 5 major characteristics of a dystopia.
So an actual dictionary definition. Let's go.
Well, it's not a dictionary definition, but the 5 characteristics are survival, loss of individualism, government control, environmental disaster, technological control, things along those lines.
I was going to say, environmental disaster is an interesting one, but we'll get into it later. Go for it, Vinny.
I was going to say, I think the traditional thought that would immediately come to mind for most people listening when they think dystopian is probably just like, burnt out remnants of a collapsed regime. I mean, Hunger Games, 1984. What other examples? Divergent.
The modern ones get Divergent, Maze Runner.
Ready Player One would be a dystopian future because they're all in a terribly economically collapsed country that has all sorts of problems.
Well, that seems to be one of the common through lines, is that they generally focus on societies that are either completely collapsed or in cataclysmic decline. Like, I think 1984 would be a good one where it's like, it's in cataclysmic decline. Like, this cannot sustain.
And what's funny, though, is at the same time, that was one of the things that one of the leaders of the inner party, I'm trying to remember his name right now, but he actually made a point of like, we can make the cycles of time stop. And even if we get to the point that people die of old age at 30, like, we can make the system work.
But why would you want to?
That's where I know I'm going to get into my thought about it, because one thing I'll talk about in a moment is what might be one of the first dystopian novels. This is Jules Verne's Paris in the 20th century. And it was, in this case, in the 18th century. If you think about it, like, this is when science was not only advancing a lot, but also at a cultural level, people started to consider it a significant part of daily life, right? Before that, everything was natural. And then in the 18th century is when you started to get the beginning of coal power and also coal synthesized chemicals. Later on, you get into the 20th century. That's when you get all the petrochemistry. There were all these transformational things happening, first in chemistry, but then also in medicine and industry. And people were starting to think, because you also had at that time the French Revolution as well, and the beginning of modernity. It's like, wow, like, with all this science and with all these like new social arrangements, what kind of world are we going to create? Like, what's going to be the result of all this? And I know, yes, that was Jules Verne. He, in the 1850s, wrote Paris in the 20th century, where he kind of guessed what the 1960s would look like. And he was actually quite accurate on a number of pieces. And that one, what's funny is a lot of the people were happy, but he also kind of explained that the world would be kind of like almost mentally like brain dead, because people did not appreciate art, could not appreciate it. But it's just everybody was just going to work and doing work and really didn't have any other interest whatsoever.
I mean, he wasn't that far off. If you look, wasn't that in the 1960s when Warhol did pop art, where he just like put out Campbell's soup cans on canvases? And
I mean, have you seen modern art?
And he talks about it in his book, and I love, there's one in particular where like the guys go into the library and he's like looking for all the great poets, and they're like, oh, like we don't even know what you guys are talking about. Like, I don't think we got those in the library anymore. But you know what we do got? We've got Abstract of Electric Problems, a practical treatise for the lubrication of drive shafts, and like it just go off and lift all these like silly ones. He's like, well, do you have any poetry? It's like, well, we've got the Poetic Parallelogram. and meditations on oxygen.
I mean, as far as the modern art goes, at this point, I just had a brilliant idea. I'm going to paint a canvas entirely blue, just blue. Then I'm going to piss on it, and I'm going to name it toilet water and sell it for $5 million.
If you have the right connections in New York, somebody would probably buy it.
I mean, I would say that if you want to go like intellectually dystopian argument, you could even go back to Paradise Lost and argue that with, I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, and kind of sets up kind of a dystopian dichotomy.
That in that sense, that what would make something dystopian or not is there is kind of an idea, and maybe this is where the environmental destruction part comes in, is that there is a way that people relate naturally. There's relationships we normally have. There's things we know that are beautiful, because again, beautiful art is true. And dystopias are around this idea that, well, with enough science and with enough power, we can just create the lie and make the lie truth.
Yeah, because I think sometimes people think dystopias always have to be some bombed out post-apocalyptic world when they don't. Brave New World is a dystopian novel. Ready Player One, right? For all the dystopian parts, it goes into the oasis, and then you're in as beautiful an environment as you can imagine, but you're then still enslaved mentally. And that's, I think, the core characteristic of dystopia is really just your mental lack of free will. Demolition Man like flips the dystopian script from what people expect, because the people who are living underground in squalor are what we would normally associate with a dystopian environment, but they're the ones championing free will and choice and actually being able to live the life the way you want to. And it's the people above ground in the super modern, super sophisticated San Angeles, of the future, that are really in the dystopia because they don't actually have free will or have choice or are able to actually do things they want to do.
I was going to say, it almost sounds like Stepford Wives, in which everyone acts really happy, but it's all an act.
Well, they were replaced with robots.
Yeah, now in that story, they were all replaced with robots. But tell me more about the Demolition Man case, because I have not engaged with that title yet. So tell me more about it.
I am shocked that people haven't seen Demolition Man. It's amazing, right?
You need culture, Mike.
I know. I need to get it on my list, because I've got some other ones here, but I got to get this one on my list.
I believe it was 1993. It starred Sylvester Stallone, Sandra Bullock, Wesley Snipes was Simon Phoenix, the bad guy, and he had a great time playing him. The concept is that John Spartan, whose name didn't get ripped off in any way for a future major video game IP at all. John Spartan, as played by Sylvester Stallone.
They ripped off a country from way back in the Roman days, so
that's true. But John Spartan's the cop who brought Simon Phoenix to justice, but he got falsely accused of manslaughter by allegedly killing hostages when he was taking Simon Phoenix into custody. And the concept to make this a sci-fi future one was, instead of putting people in regular prison, they had figured out cryogenics at that point. So they put you in cryo prison, where you would be sentenced and frozen, and then you would have mental manipulation, like subconscious manipulation, to deprogram you and rehabilitate you while you were in jail.
Okay, now I think I may have seen this, but I've got to rewatch this, dude.
Well,
they did something similar in Minority Report, so you may have seen something else.
Yeah, it was Minority Report, now that you mention it.
Yeah, so the most dystopian thing to me about the future was that all restaurants in the future were Taco Bell.
That's like idiocracy.
Yeah. It's called advertising. That's what that's called.
It was great, but like, it's a completely homogenized society. People don't make contact with each other. They do everything virtually instead of physically in terms of human interactions. They
talking about getting busy.
Yeah. I try to keep us on YouTube's good side.
I didn't say anything that wouldn't keep us on YouTube's good side.
That's true. All right. But so it sets it up when Simon Phoenix gets out, he breaks out when he was on a parole hearing from his cryo prison and starts murdering people. And the future cops are in no way capable of dealing with it, because they're in a completely modern society where people are just sheep. They don't even know what the code 187 means when it comes across their screen. It's they're like, what? They have to look it up, and it's like murder, death, kill.
Yeah.
But so to get to the dystopian part, you find out that underground, from under this super beautiful city, is basically the free people of San Angeles, because after an earthquake, Los Angeles and San Francisco have become one mega municipality, and these people are living in the remnants underground, and they are choosing to be outside of normal society because that way they get free will, they get choice, they can eat what they want, they don't have people telling them what they can and can't do, what they have to eat. And as an example, like they can have a hamburger, they can have things that are high in salt and calories and don't care, they can have a beer, they can use things that aren't seashells to wipe their butt, which was a running gag within Demolition Man.
Oh, the 3 seashells?
The 3 seashells. So you must have seen it, because you recognize that.
A little bit familiar, yeah.
Yep. And unless it's something they do in China, maybe.
No, they do not do that in China.
But so it was interesting because when you're a kid and you're just watching a dumb action movie, you don't think about the flipping the script on dystopia. And I know we've talked about sometimes storytellers wanting to subvert expectations, and they do it in stupid ways. This was a good way to subvert expectations because you're set up to think that these people must be bad because they're living in what looks like the dystopian Mad Max kind of realm, but they're really the free people. And by the end of the movie, you're on their side and want them to just be the ones running the show.
No, it sounds very cool. And also, while we're bouncing around between these, I thought about this whole concept of there's the world outside, and you kind of want to pull people out to that. There was another one, and this one to me was more fun than deeply philosophical, was Logan's Run, if you know that one.
Of course.
For whatever arbitrary reason, they set everyone had to die at age 30, and of course they turned it into this elaborate ritual to make you think you would be renewed or reborn.
Carousel, that's what it was
Yes, the
called.
carousel. But while you were alive, you lived in this kind of paradise of robots that were serving you until one day someone breaks out outside and they find out, oh, we don't have to have life clocks. We don't have to suffer all these different things within our system. Yeah. But the thing is, though, it's wild land, right? There's no provision. So it's the question of, do you want the freedom in your full life, or do you just want to go back and plug into that system?
Well, I mean, you can also go to the time machine, which was H.G. Wells, right?
Yes.
Where he went into the far future and kind of set up the dystopian with the Eloi and the Morlocks living underground.
The machine was so boring.
It actually, it works on a lot of levels. I'm going to give it a lot of credit. I mean, because when he tries to go back and change things, he can't because time won't allow the paradox, right? So the concept is the scientist who invents the time machine does it because his fiance got murdered. And every time he tries to go back and save her, it's like Final Destination. Death comes back and takes her some other way because it's a paradox, right? Because he was only able to go back in time because she died, and it spurred him to create the time machine. So it's got actually really, for as old as it is, it's the first time travel book. It's got a lot of sound time travel logic, which a lot of people abandoned later when they did time travel stories, which is a problem. But for our conversation, what comes up is when he goes to the far future after cataclysmic wars have kind of wiped the planet free of cities and things, he finds a group of people who are just innocent and incapable of supporting themselves. And he's wondering how they can still be alive. And you find out food is brought for them. They're basically cattle. What you find out is that the Morlocks, who are these underground cave-dwelling people that have evolved side by side with the Eloi, who are the nice, free, idyllic people above ground, are being given everything. They don't work, they don't plant, they don't do anything.
And I remember, because was it? He also has one Eloi girl that he kind of follows around, Weena, and it starts with she falls into a creek. And she doesn't know how to swim, and no one really knows how to save her. So they just keep playing at the edge of the creek while she's drowning.
Just stand there because they have no concept or care that she's going to pass away. Because again, basically you find out that they are livestock. They are being bred and fed to become food for the Morlocks down underground.
And the funny part too is I remember it was a class commentary as well, because the Eloi were descendants of the upper classes of the British, and the Morlocks were the working classes. So it's there's kind of
that's why they're underground, the miners, the people doing that kind of work.
Yes.
So that's another thing, dystopia can have all sorts of connotations when it's done well. And then in the last 20 years, the problem is I think people have kind of evolved dystopia into thinking it's Hunger Games. And there's been a storytelling conceit where dystopia has become a magic young person will save the world by blowing it up.
Yep. And I think that is one of the kind of like departures from some of the older stories along those lines. And I wonder if even like one of those really well done movies like The Matrix had a little bit to do with the transition. But yeah, it's almost like dystopia quit being about the philosophical question of like, what is the future going to be like given these changes going on in the world? And it switched to this is just kind of a backdrop, kind of a piece of scenery for my main character to just go off and do whatever I want them to do.
Part of it's because they moved into movies instead of books. So when you write 1984, A Brave New World, and you're writing a book, you can have the bad end, like the ending where it's designed to make you think, and people don't have happy walk away stuff. So
Yeah.
and once you start making movies out of it, you want to have that good positive ending, right? So you want Neo flying off at the end of the first Matrix. You don't want like 1984 where he's become
He loves Big Brother.
Basically, he's failed and he truly loves Big Brother.
Yes. And I'm thinking also that because this also gets into world building, because this is important for us as creators, is that if you create a moral axis where, because it's a dystopia, just everybody that the main character is going to go after is just bad by definition, there is a temptation to turn that into a kind of lazy writing.
That's true.
Think about this in the sense of, like, we can go to Hunger Games, right? So if the main character goes in, blows up whatever the games are, right? Blows up District 1. The implication is that that's all they need to do, or nothing really wrong has happened. It kind of goes into almost like a Marxist revolutionary mindset in which there is an oppressor and oppressed, and if you just make the oppressor go away, everything becomes better by default. And you don't need to think any further about, like, what does the total big picture look like? What is, like, the world we're going to create after, or what is it we're going to work towards? It's just, okay, we blew up the oppressors, we're done, and everything's great now.
Gotcha. Yeah. So not a whole lot of what's this going to look like a little longer down the road kind of thinking.
Yes, because I think that's what the classic genre was about, and this is everything from like C.S. Lewis and Abolition of Man, or That Hideous Strength, and of course, yeah, Orwell's 1984. And I also like too from Brave New World, the part where the savage actually tries to like build his little free space, but he ultimately fails and commits suicide. That question of like, well, what do we do now? And not having anywhere to go is, I think, one of the more interesting questions that get asked within the genre that you don't see as much now.
So I think you're missing the obvious answer, which we got in Falcon and Winter Soldier: do better. You just do better.
You just got to do better.
That's what you see. It's like the underwear gnome system of fixing a dystopia, right? We find the hero, we blow up the government. Step 3, step 4, everyone's happy. And then it's just like, what's step 3? Well, no, step 3 just happens. Step 4, everyone happy.
I think we're finding a new Zero's journey now.
Well, South Park did it great with the underwear gnomes. That's
with
why
the
I
underwear gnomes.
It's like step 1, steal underwear. Step 2, step 3, profit.
Yes.
It's like, and the kids are like, what's step 2?
What's step 2?
And they're like, well, no, that's step 2. Then step 3 is profit. And in Dystopia, it's like step 1, identify the hero and blow up the system. Step 2, step 3, the new government's amazing and everyone's happy. It's like, okay, that doesn't quite work that way.
And the reason why is because the Zero is now the new utopian leader. Therefore, it's going to be awesome because the Zero is awesome.
I will tell you, to be fair to Hunger Games, because I didn't read the book, but the last movie, it's not a happy ending. It's kind of like I made a compromise and I'm just kind of living with it ending. So it is in the vein of a classic dystopian philosophical book where the hero, the protagonist in a dystopian novel, doesn't generally get a happy ending. It's usually at best a morally compromised live with it ending, and usually it's a terrible ending.
Nice.
I agree. I'm not a big fan of dystopian endings.
No, because it's all about like, what did the world change into? And very often you're like, they just end up having to live with it. And I guess that leads to the next question. So remind me, because one of us actually watched the movies. So tell me more about the ending.
Of Hunger Games?
Yeah, for Hunger Games.
The ending is basically they take out President Snow and his regime, and then she, even though she probably really loved Liam Hemsworth's character, I forget what his name was in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
She actually stays with PETA because, number one, PETA was still broken from what they had done with him to him in the name of trying to capture her. And because the character Liam Hemsworth played he went full regime changing terrorist choice maker, which was planting bombs all over the place to kill people. And one of those, I think, accidentally killed her sister, and
so that changes everything.
So she can't forgive him for some of the choices she wouldn't have made. Like, that's one of the things. Like, they make these people the protagonists in these dystopian guerrilla warfare situations, and they try to keep a completely moral framework. When honestly, people in those situations generally don't keep that kind of moral framework. They compromise all the time. So it becomes, if you're doing it right.
I mean, if you're really trying to do that, you have to adopt a wartime morality, and a wartime morality is not a peacetime morality.
And I don't necessarily think that it's not a bad source of conflict within a story. It's actually a pretty good, if done right, source. Like, if you have a protagonist who genuinely is a moral person, it's going to be hard for them to adopt a wartime guerrilla tactic framework, because guerrilla tactics, by their nature, in order to take on a larger, more advanced force, involve usually doing things that are very bad. I mean, we even saw that in our own conflicts in the United States history, right? During the Revolutionary War, people don't talk about it a lot, but in the Southern theater, a lot of the Southern revolutionary guys were doing guerrilla tactics. I mean, you can get a feel for it a little bit in The Patriot, which was based on some real, revolutionary history about the Swamp Fox, right? Which was a guy who made the British lives living hell because he actually adopted the right kind of tactics to take on a larger force in your territory.
Yep.
You skirmish, you hit and run, and you blend back into the population and use the environment to your advantage. That's how the Vietnamese managed to draw us to a stalemate till we left in Vietnam.
Yep.
And do it. It's the proper technique to deal with a larger, more supplied and capable military force. It leads them to fight on your terms instead of theirs. You don't want to line up and do a pitched battle against somebody in those terms. Getting to the philosophical part, I don't disagree that that's not a good storytelling element to kind of explore. I think it didn't get explored very well in the Hunger Games. I think sometimes it's the execution that can be clumsy and make things bad. It's not necessarily a bad thought to have a moral person, because it's a very immoral situation. There's a lot of good storytelling to tell in that. My problem and nitpick was the execution. The first Hunger Games movie I actually thought was very well done for what it was. I didn't read the books, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I have seen the first movie, and I do agree with you on that assessment.
Yeah, I think that the writer kind of maybe had one book completely done and happy with it, and then sometimes it's really successful, make sequels.
That usually puts the writer in a bad situation. That was what happened to Brent Weeks. The Night Angel trilogy was amazing. Then they wanted him to pump out some more books, and not impressed.
I mean, George R.R. Martin is still trying to finish his sequels.
No, he's not, dude. He's done. He's never gonna write that book.
Oh,
kiss it goodbye.
It'll eventually come out when he dies and his estate has it and then gives it to a ghostwriter. That's what'll really happen.
Yeah, that is probably what will happen.
But it is, I do think it's just funny because it's weird to give with Harry Potter, right? People think it's just kids' book. I give a lot of credit for J.K. Rowling. The book series that she did, you could tell as she was writing it, she did grow it in terms of the subject matter for the age of the reader. You can see as the schools get, they're further into school, but she completed the story. And there was definitely a beginning, middle, and end to that tale. You might not like some of the choices that were made. I know that my brothers personally don't, well, at least one of them is really not happy that Hermione ended up with Ron. I mean, aside from shipping concerns, the story was actually fairly complete and without a lot of stuff. Now, where I think J.K. Rowling got into trouble is in The Cursed Child, where because of a money grab, they made her come back, and so she wrote that one. And then in these new movies they're making, the Fantastic Beasts, which are just clear money grabs. And what you're seeing is in those, with those sequels, they're
Mhm.
breaking the rules that she said that were very like hard and fast magic rules within the Harry Potter world.
Even the aesthetics of the world are changing when they make those Fantastic Beasts movies. It's like this does
Yes.
not feel like the same world anymore.
Yeah,
And this is
because
only supposed to be what, like this is it's a
the
prequel type
1920s and
thing.
30s.
Yeah.
What's interesting is like all of a sudden in that era, they all wore contemporary clothing, like suits.
Yeah, and then at some point they devolved to robes and shit, and it's like that's what I'm saying. Like the aesthetic doesn't follow a proper progression in any way that I can understand.
Yeah, and I mean, aside from breaking the magic rules, yeah, it doesn't continuity wise. I think sometimes you have to be true to that. Now, where the Harry Potter movies also kind of broke that rule is if you see the first two movies, they're very specific about making them look like they're in the boarding school style uniforms with the robes on and everything. By the third movie, when Alfonso Cuarón got there, which was, I think, The Prisoner of Azkaban, he puts them into like, you know, tracksuits and has them running around like in regular contemporary British clothing. It kind of, and then from there, they kind of kept that aesthetic. It kind of, because more of the movies were that way, you kind of forget about it. And especially because the first two were more kid friendly movies, you don't think about it as much because you're kind of writing those off. The first one, Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber of Secrets, where that anybody, you could argue that Harry Potter as a series gets into a dystopian direction by the last like 2-3 movies. There's definitely like basically a
with the
precursor
Ministry of Magic
dystopian.
and all that.
Oh yeah, because by the last movies, especially when Voldemort is taken back over, you know, the Ministry is bringing people in, they're controlling them, they're pulling their memories, they're, you know,
Well, even before Voldemort takes over, like the Ministry of Magic very much is like Hogwarts keeps trying to tell them, "Hey, we got a problem." And they're like, "No, everything's fine. It's all okay. Don't look over there. There's no Voldemort."
so I think that's a good, I mean, sometimes you got to go, Harry Potter is something that everyone's familiar with. Though, if you want an idea of what dystopian storytelling looks like, basically look at Harry Potter once they're getting to the point where after Goblet of Fire where Voldemort's back and you get a government that's actively misleading its people, trying to control what you're thinking. Then by the time Voldemort's actually running the show, he's actively bringing people in. Everyone's living in fear. And even though the realm looks normal and they have magic and they can make all these wonderful things happen, they're in a dystopian mental, I guess psychological dystopia would be a good way to describe it.
Yeah, because that gets to another question and a couple titles we can look at. In addition to the idea of dystopia being something where there's like an entire physical system and there's a place and there's a capital and so on and so forth, could it also be that there is kind of a psychological condition in which people do not like the world that they're living in and therefore they have to be driven to change it in some way? A couple of interesting cases for that, of course, one would be Fight Club. And another one that I thought would really kind of push the limits on this is that classic 90s film Office Space. Because if you remember, there were a whole bunch of these movies that came out at a similar time. And what's funny is all of them had this kind of thought of, oh, like the very boring, stuffy office life is in fact, in some sense, almost kind of an evil. And how do we work our way out of it?
I think that one's interesting because I think one of the things that isn't described in the research that I did prior is that in order to have that dystopian sort of feel, that those dystopian elements, it has to be a situation where the main character or characters are kind of at the end of their rope. Like they've been backed into a corner and something has to give.
Something has to change.
Yeah. And I think Fight Club very much like, you know, every same thing every day, you know, the home shopping network, just I got it all, even the glasses with tiny bubbles and imperfections, proof that they were crafted by the hardworking indigenous peoples of wherever. Like,
yes,
he was at the end of his rope, and that's when the dystopian kind of elements start coming in that he's getting insomnia. You know, the doctor's just like, you're just stressed, man. Just here, you know, chew some valerian root. Like nobody's helping him. The world isn't helping him. Nobody gives a shit. And so for him, it is very much a dystopian setting.
That the world is set up to kind of like make him be driven into this like worse and worse state.
And there is no normal, you know, societally acceptable way for him to end this suffering.
What was the speech that he gives? We were told that we'd be rock stars, and
we were all raised to think that we'd be rock stars and movie gods, and But we won't, and we're slowly finding out that fact, and we are very pissed off.
Yeah, so
Yes.
for me, I mean, Fight Club, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that because I was working at that time as a projectionist for a movie theater, everyone was always like, could you do that with a movie? Could you splice stuff in? I was like, yes, you could. It would.
You wouldn't be working there much longer, but you could.
Here's the thing, like he talked about splicing in like a single frame. It would not even register to your eye probably if you did one single frame. So I think they kind of say that in the voiceover, but the visual of the part where it like flips in and actually has audio is a little misleading. It wouldn't even be that much, because I can tell you from when I had prints get stuck and melt and burn and I had to splice out frames that got destroyed, most of the time it was able to be done and people couldn't even tell or notice. But to get to the larger question about the philosophy of Fight Club, which I do think it is dystopian because it's about being trapped in the modern, even though you think you have freedom, it's an idea. Its core idea is that you actually just have the illusion of freedom. In a lot of ways, it's basically, you could look at that as a bookend for the Matrix.
Yeah, and they came out at almost the same time.
Yeah, the Fight Club came out after the Matrix. Matrix came out in April of 99, and I believe Fight Club was fall of 99, probably around September. Because I remember I was at college, so I had to actually go pay to see it. And that was like one of the first times I'd done that in years for a movie. But it does speak to, because Dark City also came out around that same time. I think that was 97 or 98 that Dark City came out. And that's also a very noir kind of dystopian.
As well as also then
Dark City was kind of a mind fuck.
For our viewers, let's pull it out and talk about it.
Dark City? Okay.
Yeah.
So Dark City is a very complicated story. It's a mashup of so many genres. At its core, stylistically, it's film noir, which means it's very dark. It's got a protagonist who's kind of trying to do a detective story, usually to unlock a mystery. What you find out is that the mystery involves basically aliens that control everybody who lives in this city. There's a lot going on in this one. But then it gets into the question of free will, because it turns out this city that he's living in is a giant experiment that these aliens are running constantly. It's on a nightly basis. They reset people and they change what their professions are, what their memories are. It looks like it's some grand experiment about, watching how people react under different circumstances, if there's core parts of you or if things are completely manipulatable.
Very classic debate, of course, the whole nature and nurture thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they throw in the fact that these aliens have telekinetic powers and that this guy is given by a turncoat human who had been working with the aliens to assist them with their work. He's given access to the same powers they have to manipulate the world and use his mind to fight them. He's the one. Before Neo was the one, right? He's able to take out all the aliens because he's stronger, better, faster at it. He's the chosen one, so to speak. And he ends up freeing, he doesn't free the people. He changes the world and lets them now have choice. But they're still trapped on this cityscape, right? He probably can't. They're in space. You find out that this is a giant craft in space, which doesn't mean that he can really probably go back to Earth, right, where the humans are most likely from.
Yep.
Is just letting them live their lives and now on a nightly basis not be reset. The big visual way they represent this is because it was always night, right? It was perpetual night. And at the end, he allows the sun to come in. So it's visually showing that now they can come into the light. It's a very easy kind of visual cue for people to pick up.
And very powerful, yes.
And it's very powerful. But if you start thinking about it, it's like these people are still trapped in that world, but he's not really able to do much more for them anyway. So he's given them as much as he could. So they're as free as they can be. So that's the happy ending.
Yeah.
But that's why it's a real dystopian thing, because if you start drilling down to it, they're trapped in the last iteration that the aliens had put them in.
I was going to say, it might not be such a happy ending for the guy who, a week ago was the world famous $1 million actor, but then the night before this all went down, he got switched to janitor.
Well, that's what I mean. So if as long as you won the lottery and your last iteration was the best one that you've had in a while or could get, and there's no real karma to it, right? People might have been living good, happy lives, allegedly, and then they get moved up or moved down just based on what the aliens' choices were. So it's not like there's any real karma to how he locked people into their lives at that point. So that's why I
Kind of
think
reminds me of the Truman Show.
Oh yeah, that's another good one.
That's an interesting dystopia.
Because in that case, the rest of the world was a normal world, but it's like for just this one man, you're right, like they locked him into this artificial world as a TV show.
but
Yeah,
you
for
can
him, it is dystopian. For everyone else, it's a job.
no, but you can look at it the way you can go further with that, and what the Truman Show is getting at is if you're watching it, you'll notice that they keep cutting to people who are completely invested in watching his life. Like these viewers are completely glued to watching his show 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and no longer concerned with living their own.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's kind of layers of manipulation, because if Truman's life is being completely manipulated and they're watching it thinking they're watching him just living his life, everybody's being manipulated by, in this case, it was Ed Harris playing the director who was making all the choices for Truman's life since he was
And
born.
Ed Harris is amazing in
Yes.
everything he does.
I mean, he even elevated The Rock, which is one of Joey's personal favorites.
He didn't elevate it, okay? It was already at the top, and he was icing on the cake.
Yes. But to go back to the Truman Show, though, yeah, I remember there was that key line where he's like, I wanted to let somebody live a normal life. And that was a very interesting quote. It's like, what is a normal life?
Well, especially since throughout the him letting someone live a normal life, he then, as you know, Truman wanted to make more and more decisions and be more and more free, so to speak. Like the director's controls became more and more obvious. At first, he wasn't pushing back, and he was living a pretty normal life. But the more he rebelled, the harder the control became.
They created a trauma to make sure that he would never want to like go out past the barriers of the place he lived. I mean,
And then he went to the travel agency, and they had the picture of the plane getting struck by lightning, and they're like, it could happen to you. And it's like, wow, they really don't want to sell tickets here.
Yeah.
I mean, they were the kings of the staycation, obviously.
Obviously.
But I mean, it gets into, there's a lot of stuff that can qualify as dystopian when you start really thinking about the fact that it's more about being trapped into something that you don't have control over.
A great one that I read in high school, and probably the only book I didn't actually just read the Cliff Notes and call it good, was Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies is an environmental kind of survival dystopia. Bunch of kids trapped on an island.
That one's interesting, especially if you juxtapose it against Swiss Family Robinson, because Lord of the Flies was the idea that if you took a whole bunch of boys and you kind of dropped them into a sort of anarchic situation where there's no leadership, that no society would form, but it would pretty much just be a chaos and things would collapse quickly. Whereas I think there was a real life case of something like Lord of the Flies where a group of boys like broke out of their school out in these like Polynesian islands. They escaped. They ended up on another island. And they actually did have a sort of like functioning society where they had their own set of rules. So it was kind of a disproof to Lord of the Flies, but I do remember that. And I remember kind of like what the author's thought was of if you took people out of civilization, could they form a new one? And he said no.
Yeah, the belief was that given extreme enough circumstances, everyone reverts to tribalism.
Tribalism and straight up barbarism, yes.
Which I don't disagree, but I think it's a coin toss, you know? It really depends on the group.
What's interesting is if you go to like The Dark Knight, that was one of the philosophical underpinnings of the Joker's, character and what he was doing at the end. And Christopher Nolan made a very active choice to say that's actually not what would happen. Like he put, what was it, the example where it was the prisoners on the transport ship, and the one guy comes up and he breaks the control to not let the people try to blow up the other thing.
He just threw it out the window, just into the drink.
Yep, because it was that there's people who will still make the moral choice even under the extreme circumstances. It seems like Christopher Nolan was going back to the classic Joker story, which is The Killing Joke, right? That's the one where Barbara Gordon got her spine severed and became paralyzed. He didn't realize Barbara Gordon was Batgirl. He wasn't going after her for that reason. He was going after her because he was trying to prove to Batman that every person is one bad day away from being the Joker. So he was trying to prove that by putting Jim Gordon, the commissioner, Batman's ally, through such terrible trauma that he would break and become a bad person. Like he would break the moral codes. And in the story, he doesn't. And Batman then proves, like, says, I've proved to you, Joker, he didn't break, you're wrong. Of course, they couldn't pull off the Killing Joke with modern comic book storytelling because, number one, they would relate to the Joker too much. They would want a revenge story. They wouldn't be able to have the good man stand up on his value. But that's where Nolan, I think, was going. So dystopia can be, again, I hate when people talk about subverting expectations because we've made it a joke because of what they did with some of these other movies lately with like Last Jedi and Rian Johnson and these guys talking about it. There's not anything bad about trying to subvert an expectation if you've got a story reason why and it's going to make the audience happy. What happens is sometimes people subvert the expectations for the sole purpose of giving double middle fingers to the audience, and that's a completely wrong choice. So I do think that there is a place. I don't like when people say that we shouldn't try to subvert expectations at all. I think Literature Devil was talking about that when we talked with him, that you can do good subversions of expectations, but you've got to have a crafted story reason to do it.
Well, and like you said, it's the difference between subverting the expectations so that you get that really big payoff, that holy shit moment, like in Fight Club, where, we find out, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, but
Yes.
we find out that, he is Tyler Durden. They are the same person. So that...
What?
I know, right? Holy shit!
You go back and watch the movie again, it's like, this is a totally different movie now.
Yeah.
I mean, I do
actually,
appreciate...
in all honesty, you do that with that movie. Like, you go back and you notice a whole bunch of things you didn't notice the first time.
There's two movies you can really do that well, and they came out around the same time. You do that with Fight Club, where you can go back now that you see it, and then Memento.
Memento also, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is all, once you've seen it through the first time, when you go back and rewatch it, it's totally different.
But like those movies aren't subverting expectations to give you the middle finger. And I don't understand how Hollywood thinks this is going to work. If you flip me off enough times, eventually I'm just not going to come back.
I was going to say, I think it's now in the case of activism in Hollywood and all this, I think it's the case of these people really think that, because this is the progressive mindset, by the way, is that they're in a sort of holy war. And to them, the goal is not to make money. The goal is, I'm just going to use whatever resources are available to fight the war. If we lose the movie making industry as collateral damage, well, that's acceptable as long as we reach our ends.
See, the thing is,
that's the thing. I think they're going to lose the industry as collateral damage. It may take decades, but I think they will lose the industry and they will not achieve their ends. Like, I just don't think it's happening.
Because again, it's the whole contrary to nature thing.
It's because we are free, for the most part, a free market. Not a perfect free market. Obviously, there are regulations and everything else. But like, we are enough of a free market economy that if they are not fulfilling the demand, someone else will.
Yeah. And what I was going to say, too, of course, is if you look in history, even in pre-democratic times, it was still the case that if the king or whatever part of the ruling class goes far enough off the mark, that exact same thing happens, is people eventually just abandon the king, and he can crack down more and more until he gets overthrown, and then there's a new kingdom, right? Because that has happened many, many times in history.
The king is dead. Long live the king.
Yes.
Well, I mean, look at the browser wars back in the day when we were young, early adults and whatnot. Like, Yahoo used to be the king of the game, and
yeah.
I mean,
has anybody gone to Yahoo anytime recently?
I'll predate that, buddy. I'll Ask Jeeves, Alta Vista. You can start going all sorts of stuff.
Netscape Navigator versus Internet Explorer.
Which makes me think of a really...
I think Chrome came in and kicked both their asses.
Have you seen the... I'm sure you guys have the Merriweather comics.
Oh yeah,
where Internet Explorer finds banished
Netscape
and goes into the like internet graveyard and is next to Netscape Chan.
Yes, and like brings her back up to the normal internet for one last time.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's Internet Explorer is like, you've been replaced now by Chrome Chan and by what is the new one that Microsoft has that no one uses?
Edge.
Edge, yeah.
And you remember...
Edge is just Internet Explorer repackaged. It really is.
It's still shit. It's still shit. But you remember MySpace. MySpace used to be the king of social media back in the day.
Dude, I remember before MySpace was Bolt.com. I'm not sure if you remember that one, but...
I don't remember that. I'm not that big a nerd.
Yeah, Bolt.com got replaced by MySpace.
Look, before all of that, there was AIM, right? You just your social media was using AOL Instant Messenger and making sure you had a good away message. You want to talk about a dystopian future? put a bad away message up or forget to put one up and like come home to your dorm room and see all these messages of people getting pissed off because you're not answering back. And that's why I think
The first
AOL
cancel culture.
That's why I think AOL added the like the idle function so that people, oh, he must actually not be at the computer. It was a BRB.
He's out. What's the phrase now? Touching grass. He's out touching grass right now.
BRB, AFK.
Yep.
What was and then you'd have all the ones with the random girls you might be talking with. You got to have those text skills.
Yeah, ASL. ASL? Question mark?
Nice.
You got to have the right music lyric in as your away message. You make it profound but still entertaining. That's dystopia right there, is where you're being faced by the pressure of your peers to make sure you have away messages and all these other things.
I was going to say, because bringing it out of dystopian fiction and into reality, that'll be a good book. I'm thinking for the video, all the different book titles are going to throw up. But yeah, there's one, it's a really great book called Google Archipelago by Michael Rechtenwald. And that's the book where he also actually coins the phrase corporate socialism, in which you get kind of the control system of a socialist or communist society, but it's actually done through corporations. One of the things he describes in it is with some of these platforms, the way they are designed, because you are always like everything you're saying is public and everything you're saying is potentially watched, you start behaving like you're watched.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people do that these days. I feel like a lot of people have embraced behaving like they're watched. Like that's.
I mean, it's the observer effect, right? The act of being observed changes behavior. Even I think they've proven it even happens when you don't know you're being observed. It's some like weird glitchy thing where that we have some kind of psychological spidey sense that when we're being observed, and we will change our behavior to a certain point. I was on a YouTube stream with Literature Devil and the World Class Bullshitters Guide yesterday, and I brought up the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, right, which is the company from Blade Runner and Alien. They're the companies that are in both of them because it's a shared universe. But the corporate message, the corporate like motto for Weyland-Yutani, which is the company that again is bringing about the aliens onto Earth and doing all these terrible things, is building better worlds. It's on the corporate logo, and this was like back in the mid 80s, and it was just like it's too perfect. It's exactly like you could see Facebook, or I guess Meta now, or whatever their brand is, or your Alphabet and Google, like just putting that Alphabet, building better worlds.
Yeah, remember when their motto was "Don't be evil"?
Yeah, they moved on from that. Shockingly,
we have gone beyond good and evil. We are the moral arbiters of everything now.
I don't know how much you guys play Warhammer 40,000 games, but I was big into that for a while for the computer games. And I'm just thinking of a particular demon. It's like, when the galaxy burns, we will define righteousness.
I've never played one. I've got some friends who have played them, but they're just they're trying to put so much into like it's almost like they don't have enough time. It seems like they're almost like duct taped together at the seams by the end. Like they've got good shit in there, but they never quite put the finishing touches on their games.
I mean, we could probably just do an episode just on talking about like different game designs for sure. But I can kind of see that, especially because you're adapting a tabletop RPG or a tabletop game into the computer game.
So I think one of the hallmarks of I can sum up just to kind of wrap it up. Because it just popped into my head from Watchmen, which is about one of the more dystopian style comic books you can get into, right? And the quote from Dr. Manhattan, because I think this is what if you want to sum up what dystopia is about, and this is kind of the philosophical mindset, is from Dr. Manhattan. You're a man, and this world's smartest man means no more to me than its smartest termite, right? Because he's basically saying you are beneath me, you are nothing to me, you pose no risk to me. Dystopia is summed up in that quote because when you're doing with something dystopian, there's some kind of, whether it's a regime, a person, an evil antagonist, some nebulous organization, it's something where it has that Dr. Manhattan mindset where I am so far above you that you are meaningless to me, and your life is just to be done, for the purpose of serving my needs, if at all.
And even if you're the enemy, you're just there for my entertainment until I'm done with you.
Exactly. Like the Logan's Run thing. You're good for 20 years until you go to Carousel, and then you move on.
And if you don't feel like moving on, well, we've got a group of people who kind of take care of the remainder.
Yeah, we'll get they'll
Sandman.
come after you. The Sandman will get you because you're a runner, and then you'll be forcibly retired.
I think before we shut it down, lightning round, what's your favorite dystopia?
Oh, yes, this is good.
It's very lightning.
Vinny, you go first.
All right. My
Because you seem
favorite.
the least ready.
Yeah, my favorite dystopia is actually it's a book series by Dan Simmons. It's 2 books. It's Ilium and Olympus. And it's more hopeful because they get into how you fix the world after it's done. So they actually thought about that. So I would recommend that one. It's a deep sci-fi, philosophical, and historical because it goes into the like Battle of Troy. So there's a lot going on there, but that would be my favorite.
Nice. How about you go next, Joey?
Okay, well, my favorite is, and you guys know me, so it's Terry Brooks' title, but the Armageddon's Children from, I think it's called the Genesis of Shannara trilogy. It's very interesting. I fell in love with it because my favorite books that Terry Brooks ever wrote were the Running with the Demon trilogy, which is Running with the Demon, Night of the Word, Angel Fire East, where it's basically like a battle is happening in modern days between good and evil, but it's like the behind the scenes kind of thing where like they're influencing events, they're acting behind the scenes, they're making people do horrible things, but like nobody knows, is fully aware that it's happening. And then when you get into the Armageddon's Children trilogy, the word lost and the void won. So I guess at some point there was a nuclear apocalypse and the world is just brought to ruin and the demons are now in control of things. And it's kind of that like natural disaster elements of just trying to survive for humanity. And I guess it kind of leads into the beginnings of Shannara. So pretty excellent books. I would not recommend starting off with Armageddon's Children. If you are gonna go read it, go start with Running with the Demon. Running with the Demon is, in my opinion, the best thing Terry Brooks ever wrote. So
cool. We gotta
Not
get
to
to
be
the title.
confused
Check
with
out.
the Van Halen song "Running with the Devil," right?
A little
no,
bit
just the
different.
demon. Just the demon. There is no devil in this. They're just demons.
Gotcha.
Although you just touched on a part of my childhood because was it Van Halen, REO Speedwagon, and like all of those other type of rock bands? We listened to a lot of that growing up. And then of course I like getting into some of the more philosophical ones, and I really like this one I've been reading recently, which is Jules Verne's Paris in the 20th Century, right? And then of course the big title classics that they made you read in school, but also
God, you make us so intellectual.
I know, and then of course C.S. Lewis.
Do you mean that Demolition Man doesn't count as an intellectual exploration of dystopian future?
I mean, I, my good friend, do believe that is an intellectual exploration of a dystopian future.
Yes. And look, putting all of our heads together makes it much better than any one of us. But also, too, I was going to mention, I liked especially C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, that series of essays. He just does such a great job just explaining like what it is that we're actually in for. And then, of course, finally, too, as you know, like I'm trying to write a dystopian comedy right now, so we're going to see how that one turns out. The question of, can you write a dystopian comedy?
I mean, it's looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, because that one, I know the whole premise is coming out of the world building, there's always this assumption that whatever regime it is somehow so all-knowing or so powerful that the protagonist is always helpless against them. But if you look at like actual authoritarian regimes, they usually like end up turning into basket cases in one way or another, and that's actually the real reason why things suck under authoritarianism. So maybe
they devolve into absurdity.
Exactly. So maybe we can make something out of that.
Dystopian comedy's been done a little bit, at least once with
yeah, look at Idiocracy. Idiocracy is a dystopian comedy.
True, Idiocracy, yes.
And Dr. Strangelove, I would say, is sort of a dystopian comedy.
And while it doesn't quite fit into the genre, of course, like Spaceballs is about an authoritarian regime that is just a total basket case.
Mel Brooks' Robin Hood.
Yeah. So
but Spaceballs is great. Like under that shield is 1,000 years of fresh air, and then he turns to the guy. It's like the way he runs things, it won't last 100.
And then later on, under stress, he's like, "I don't know what to do. I can't make decisions. I'm the president."
President Scroob.
Yes.
I used to get in trouble because I didn't realize as a young man that was the up yours, thing when they were doing it. And you watch Spaceballs when you're like 5, and you just start going around doing the green.
It's like they're doing that as the salute.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's a good note to end on. Spaceballs is dystopian comedy. Enjoying it.
I think we went from the depths into the happy place. So
In the best way we could. All right. Well, guys, it's been a good one. Looking forward to see you all next week because I know we've got another interview coming up, and we'll talk to you all then.
All right. Bye, everybody.
bye.